Okay, imagine this. You inherit the world's most valuable wine, a rare vintage. Nothing else comes close. But the bottle is so fragile that just touching the cork would shatter it into dust. You have it right in front of you, a priceless treasure, but you can't open it. That's exactly the insane situation scholars have been dealing with for centuries when it comes to the Herculaneum scrolls. In 79 AD, Mount Vesuvius erupted, burying Pompeii under ash and pumice. But few people know that a small town next door, called Herculaneum, was also wiped off the map. Under nearly 20 meters of rock and ash, hundreds of priceless papyrus scrolls survived. They weren't burned. They were baked into black, twisted lumps of charcoal, so brittle that just touching them would turn them to dust. This is the only surviving library from the ancient Greco-Roman world. But for almost 2,000 years, nobody could read them. Until now. Before we get to the crazy part, let's understand why these scrolls matter. The library at the Villa of the Papyri in Herculaneum is the only library from antiquity that survives today. It belonged to Lucius Calpurnius Piso Caesoninus, a Roman senator and the father-in-law of Julius Caesar. Think about that. Julius Caesar's father-in-law's library. These scrolls contain long-lost works from ancient Greek philosophers, mostly writings by Philodemus, a philosopher of the Epicurean school. People who believed that the purpose of life was to avoid fear and pain, to achieve pleasure. Imagine a library containing the collected wisdom of an entire civilization, buried under 20 meters of volcanic rock. For 1,700 years, nobody even knew it existed. When they finally found it, they couldn't read a single word. For another 300 years, they tried everything. They failed. And then, after 2,000 years of silence, the dead began to speak. But here's the problem. These scrolls look like lumps of charcoal. You can't just unroll them. For 300 years, archaeologists tried every insane method to read them. They injected mercury into the scrolls. They soaked them in ether. They coated them with vegetable glue to soften them. Some methods partially worked, but most just destroyed priceless scrolls. And then, everything changed. Meet Giorgio Angelotti. He's a theoretical physicist, and his job sounds like a sci-fi movie. He placed a Herculaneum scroll, looking like a lump of charcoal, into a particle accelerator. Then he blasted it with a super powerful X-ray beam. He performed safety checks before leaving the hatch. Because, as he said, you have to make sure there's nobody inside before closing the door, so nobody dies. That's how they read the Herculaneum scrolls. They didn't unroll them. They scanned them at super high resolution, just 2 micrometers. And then they let AI do the rest. Here's the truly magical part. The ink on these scrolls was made from carbon, basically the same material as the scroll itself, after being carbonized. To the human eye, ink and paper are one. Impossible to tell apart. But AI can. It was trained to find the tiniest signals differences in texture, density, depth that indicate the presence of ink. Then it draws those letters onto a 3D scan. And suddenly, ancient Greek letters start emerging from the darkness. But that was just the easy part. In 2023, a 21-year-old computer science student named Luke Farrater was sitting in his dorm room. He wasn't a historian. He wasn't a classicist. He was just a guy who saw a challenge on the internet and thought, I can do that. And he did. He read the first word from a scroll that hadn't been read in 2,000 years. One single word. And it changed everything. That was the turning point. That project was called the Vesuvius Challenge. The founders, including Brent Seals, a computer science professor at the University of Kentucky, set a bold goal. They announced a $1 million prize for the first person or team to read a complete Herculaneum scroll. They put all the data code and AI models online for free. They called on the global community to participate. And it worked. Here's where the story gets absolutely insane. In June 2026, researchers reached a historic milestone. For the first time, they read the complete text of a sealed Herculaneum scroll. Not just a few words, not just a paragraph, the whole thing. They recovered nearly 1.5 meters of text spread across 22 columns from a scroll just 2 centimeters thick. Federica Nicoladi and her team were staring at the screen. They had been working on this scroll for months, years. And then, in one night, everything changed. 140 columns of text, a library's worth of knowledge. She said, "Just last night, in front of Mount Vesuvius, something, or should I say, everything, changed." But she wasn't talking about the volcano. She was talking about history. Before that, they could only read about 10% of the columns. Everything is changing, faster than anyone could imagine. Brent Seals said at the conference in Naples, "Only a year ago, it would have been insane to believe that we could read an intact scroll with hundreds of columns. Today, we've proven it's possible." And then he said something that made everyone hold their breath. "I believe we will read every scroll in the collection." About 45 scrolls have already been scanned. More than 600 unopened scrolls are still waiting. And most of the villa of the papyri remains unexcavated. Hundreds more scrolls could still be underground. So what does this story tell us? 4 videos, 4 stories. Akhenaten erased because he threatened the priests. Cuauhtémoc erased because he lost. Frank Rosenblatt erased because of indifference. And now, Herculaneum, buried by nature, forgotten by time. But there's a difference. Akhenaten was erased by people. Cuauhtémoc was erased by enemies. Rosenblatt was erased by indifference. But Herculaneum, it was buried by a natural disaster, and it waited 2,000 years to be read. And now, with the help of artificial intelligence, we can finally hear what the ancients had to say. This is the first time in history we can read texts without choosing between preserving and reading them. We can do both. "This is history," Nicoladi said. "This is completely changing the field. For 2,000 years, these scrolls were dead. But with AI, we've brought them back to life. The dead can speak. We just have to learn to listen." But this is just the beginning. Think about what's waiting for us. Lost works of Greek philosophers, the earliest Christian texts, new insights into ancient Greek religion. All of them are sitting there, waiting to be read. And the technology is evolving faster than ever. The Vesuvius Challenge founders believe AI algorithms and ink detection techniques can be significantly improved. They're calling for more computer experts to join the effort. And with every new scroll, the AI learns, it becomes smarter, faster, more accurate. This is one of the greatest stories of historical resurrection ever told. A library buried in ash for 2,000 years. Scrolls too fragile to touch. But with artificial intelligence and particle accelerators, we're finally listening to the voices of the ancients. This is the 4th video in our series on the erased. Video 1. Akhenaten, the pharaoh who was erased for believing in one god. Video 2. Formosus, the pope who was put on trial after he died. Video 3. Cuauhtémoc the emperor who was burned, hanged, and erased. Video 4. Frank Rosenblatt, the forgotten father of AI. Video 5. Herculaneum, the library buried for 2,000 years. 3 different worlds, 3 different centuries, 1 terrifying pattern. History isn't written by the winners. History is rewritten by the winners. They try to control the story. They try to decide who gets remembered and who gets forgotten. But sometimes, the story fights back. This is Oddyssey. We dig up the weird, the forgotten, and the unbelievable every week. If you haven't seen our videos about Akhenaten, Formosus, Cuauhtémoc, or Frank Rosenblatt, click the screen right now. Subscribe if you want more stories that history tried to bury. Because trust me, this is just the tip of the iceberg. They tried to bury it. We dig it back up. History is stranger than fiction. See you next time.